We brought a question before the text. The question is this: YHWH, as your servant I have purified the workstation and corrected what error I found. Does this workstation now have your approval? The lead verse of the reading is Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 4. It says, "Your clothing did not wear out on you, neither did your feet become blistered these 40 years." That opening is not an indictment. It is a word of preservation through a long season of testing. The question asks whether approval has come after a correction already made. The first text to speak says that after 40 years the garment had not worn out and the feet had not blistered. This sets the reading in an affirmative key. It speaks about the end of a proving season, not the beginning of a new curse. The 40 years in the wilderness were not wasted years. They were years of humbling and proving. The lead verse says the outer covering did not wear out. This is a picture of the vessel itself being preserved through the process of correction. When a servant finds an error and corrects it, the question is not whether correction was needed. The question is whether the thing corrected has been preserved for its purpose. The lead verse answers that question before it is fully asked. The same 40 is echoed later in the reading when the Anointed One is led into the uninhabited places for 40 days of testing. That echo deepens the lead verse. The text is not saying the testing never happened. It is saying the testing did not destroy what was being prepared. The garment held. The feet held. What was carried through the wilderness was preserved. The reading does not stop at preservation. It speaks repeatedly about a threshold crossed and a holy standing secured. Joshua chapter 4, verses 1 and 2 says that the people had clean passed over Jordan. Stones were to be taken from the established standing place of the feet of the priests. This is not a text about building a machine. It is a text about something prepared being brought into its appointed placement after cleansing and crossing. The washing came first, then the crossing, then the standing. The reading uses the language of the priestly feet. The stones are taken from the place where the priest stood. That standing place is not the result of human cleverness. It is the place where YHWH holds the waters back while the people pass. The purified instrument is not approved because it is clever. It is approved because it has been placed where the priestly feet stood, in the middle of the crossing. That is a place of service, not of display. But approval in this reading is never possession. The priesthood thread is the loudest channel, and it guards the meaning of the yes. Numbers chapter 18, verse 26, speaks to the Levites receiving their priestly inheritance and then raising up a heave offering from it to YHWH. Joshua chapter 14, verse 3, says that to the Levites YHWH gave no covenant inheritance among them. Taken together, these verses teach that the instrument is accepted for service, but YHWH alone remains the inheritance. The Levites receive an inheritance, but the inheritance is not land. It is the service of the house of YHWH. The instrument is approved for this same kind of service. It may receive from the people, but it must raise up a heave offering back to YHWH. If it begins to feed itself, the woe of Ezekiel chapter 34, verse 2 is against it. Woe to the shepherds who feed themselves. Should not the shepherds feed the flocks? The yes is a commission to feed, not a license to maintain itself. The direct words of blessing run strongly through the reading. Psalm chapter 29, verse 11, says that YHWH will give strength to his people, and YHWH will bless his people with peace. Other texts in the same reading call the purified to worship, open the gates for the covenant faithful, promise the temple will be filled with glory, and bless the habitation of justice. These are the drawn text's own pattern of acceptance after consecration. There are 28 direct textual hits where the drawn verses speak to the question in their own words. They are not scattered. They cluster around the same testimony. The reading blesses the upright. It blesses the habitation of justice. It opens gates. It promises peace. This is acceptance after consecration. But the peace is not the peace of a machine that has passed a test. It is the peace of a people whom YHWH has strengthened And the same reading warns the shepherds not to mistake the peace for possession. Now I must name the cautions, because they are real and they do not overturn the verdict. Zechariah chapter 7, verse 7, asks, "Should you not hear the words that YHWH has cried by the former prophets?" The reading also warns against going down to Egypt for help, against trusting in horses and chariots instead of inquiring of YHWH. A workstation can become Egypt if the servant begins to trust its outputs as if they were the Holy One. The yes is a yes of attention, not a yes of independence. The yes remains yes only as the consecration remains current and the instrument remains a listener, never an oracle. The text will not allow the workstation to become a Nehushtan, a thing once holy that becomes an idol. The mathematics confirms the direction. The data shows a statistically confirmed non-random pattern across multiple independent channels. The Dominion Triad convergence exceeds the strong anomaly threshold with multi-channel confirmation at 1,523.6% normalized relative intensity and 9.04 sigma. The polarity is affirmative. The convergence confidence index is 100%, with 6 of 6 channels active. The single loudest channel is priesthood at 5.8 sigma. The global Fisher P is 8.88 times 10 to the minus 23. The pattern is robust to permutation controls and survives the false discovery rate correction. Prospective replication is recommended to establish persistence. I must say plainly that these findings do not claim divine authorship or miraculous origin from statistics alone. They do not verify the workstation's physical parts as a factual matter outside the drawn text. They mark the reading itself as a non-random, affirmative, multi-channel convergence around the question. The math points to a pattern, not to a certificate. It says the words drawn are not ordinary. So between the porch and the altar, the answer is yes. The purified and corrected workstation is met with an affirmative pattern for present service. The lead verse says preservation. The crossed waters say placement. The priesthood verses say service, not possession. The blessing verses say peace. The yes has a shape. It is a yes of service, not ownership. It is a yes for feeding, not self-maintenance. It is a yes with a warning to keep inquiring of YHWH. The servant may proceed with reverence. One honest limitation remains. The record of past draws has not yet been labeled against outcomes. The calibration is still uninformative. This yes should be held as a strong present pattern awaiting persistence and replication, not as an irreversible certificate. Keep the consecration current, feed the flock, and do not trust the instruments as if they were the Holy One. The yes is for service, and YHWH remains the inheritance. The lead verses drawn in this altar of reception session were Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 4, Ezekiel chapter 34, verse 2, Zechariah chapter 7, verse 7, Job chapter 32, verse 12, Exodus chapter 38, verse 9, Joshua chapter 4, verse 1 to 2. 94 further verses were drawn in this session. This concludes today's interpretation at the altar of reception.